Hey everyone, how's it going? So today we're looking at the 19 teens and 20s, um, mainly focusing from 1918 to 1929. And we will be kind of setting a larger stage so that way you're able to contextualize, okay, what is happening um, in the African American experience in relation to the larger period of the 1920s, um, but also looking at violence and resistance, looking at the Great Migration, the Harlem Renaissance, spectacles of color, the queer experience in and throughout the Harlem Renaissance, in the club, the women's club movement, and women's civic engagement as well as activism. And finally, Pan-Africanism and also Marcus Garvey and the UNIA movement. So setting the stage. So you have a flu epidemic which killed more than 700,000 Americans. Mind you, the United States got into World War I at the tail end of it, and just in 1 year of battle, more than 116,000 American soldiers lost their lives. We also see during this time an increased anti-labor, anti-union, anti-immigrant an era of political repression and strong anti-communist sentiment due to World War One and the Bolshevik Revolution, and also the fact that there was like 30 mail bombings in 1919. The United States in the 1920s was a culture of consumption. Um, People are buying cars more than ever before. Now you have the department store, which was new, right? So you have a department store where now you can literally go to one place for all of your shopping needs, and they had little restaurants in them and they were cute, so you could eat there too. Encouraging this like all day experience of you buying everything from a refrigerator, ooh, to clothing, to bedding, whatever the hell you need, right? It is in Bullock's. It is in Macy's, right? This was exciting, right, for the American public. Um, Also, you have a large culture of escape. Mind you, folks just came out of a war and a pandemic. I don't know if your life sounds like 100 years ago, but if it does, welcome. Welcome to the club. And so as a result of this culture of escape, right, we see this expansion of how people want to understand themselves. We see this expansion of music, this reorientation to the world around you through art, through film, through the radio. So technology largely is fueling this culture of escape. We also see the 18th Amendment, which is tied to prohibition, and therefore prohibits the sale and distribution, but not consumption of alcohol. We also see the 19th Amendment, affording white women the right to vote. I say specifically white women because it's accurate. Oftentimes, we simply just say it allowed women the right to vote, but black women did not get the right to vote. Indigenous women did not get the right to vote. Pretty much no one else, unless you were designated as white. Jazz music is popularized in the 1920s, as is the blues. We also see a redefinition of gender and racial identities through the new Negro and also through the new woman. And we also see the Harlem Renaissance, right? As a result of the Great Migration, we see this creative boom that comes out of Harlem, New York. And so when it comes to American culture, you have American car culture heavily influencing the American public, right? And so as a result of, this whole Gilded Era, hyper efficiency style assembly lines, production was able to reduce the cost of the car, right? And it made it more affordable to the American middle class. And so you have by 1925, Ford factories were able to produce the Model T every single 10 seconds. Every 10 seconds. It takes me about 10 seconds to read that a car was made, right? And so you have the automobile industry fostering a new culture of consumption, also through promotion of credit. You could get stuff on credit now. And so by 1927, you have 60% of American cars sold on credit. And also, installment payment plans began to be available for most large consumer purchases. And when it comes to car culture, you have car culture granting women more autonomy, right? So now women can drive themselves and their children to activities. Young people begin to date without supervision. What does this mean? This means that young people are now having sex far more than they ever were before. And also, due to the increase of people traveling via car, you have gas stations, diners, motels, billboards beginning to pop up around the roadside, right? So now you have like small towns and establishments that can be created because now people have access to cars far more often. You also have a car becoming a source of entertainment through the Indy 500. And by the late 1920s, 80% of the world's cars were in the United States. When it comes to technology in the 1920s, there were several technological advancements that greatly impacted the American population. Radios began to come into the American home in the 1920s, and by 1930, nearly half of American homes had a radio. When radios entered into American homes, commonly you would have soap companies sponsoring radio dramas, right? So telenovelas, but make it audible, right? And these soap companies would sponsor radio dramas that were called soaps. Aha! Like a soap opera. Now, as we're talking about these advancements in entertainment, you also have Jewish immigrants who were responsible for the development of Hollywood, right? People like Harry, Albert, Sam, and Jack Warner, founding Warner Brothers. In 1918, you have Universal, Paramount, Columbia, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, MGM, all founded by or led by Jewish executives, right? And so a part of the reason why, and because they knew that they were treated as outsiders, Jewish peoples, right? You have these executives who intentionally made films that portrayed or reflected white American values of opportunity, democracy, and freedom. And Hollywood at this time was seen as being lower class in comparison to live theater, right? And the first film with synchronized word and sound was that of The Jazz Singer in 1927, out of which you have the motion picture industry being seen as like a really and truly American institution where you potentially in these movie theaters have the rich and the poor being in the same spaces together, right? And we also see jazz music being invented in New Orleans. And even though it was invented at the turn of the century, we also see it being popularized and in many ways appropriated in the 1920s. And you have The Jazz Singer, which there is an image of Al Jolson on the left-hand side. But this is a film that was done in blackface, right? And seen as an American classic. Mind you, this was not new, this performance in blackface, but a continuation from minstrel show performances that began in the mid-1800s. And truly, these performances were a reflection of the most American form of entertainment, which really is racism. If we're just being... And so the new woman. So in 1920, we have white women gaining the right to vote through the 19th Amendment. We also see the creation of an Equal Rights Amendment that was not successfully passed, however, championed by Alice Paul and the National Women's Party, and it called for the elimination of all distinctions or discrimination on the account of sex. We also see a rejection of the values of a desexualized, modest self that had to show self-restraint. And this gives rise to the era of the flapper. You have women who are wearing shorter dresses, their ankles are showing, and 10% of married women worked at this time. And also as a result of car culture, we see an increase in premarital sex. And so this wraps us up in our conversation on the larger context of the United States in the 1920s. And in subsequent lectures, we'll be talking more about how African Americans are kind of fitting into, engaging with, conflicting with that conversation. Take care of yourselves.